The Healey-Driscoll Administration has released a plan to address the needs of farmland across Massachusetts.
The action bringing the state to the forefront of conservation efforts across the nation.
Farmers right now, like the level of risk that we're facing as climate change is ramping up is increasing pretty fast.
Sarah Voiland and Red Fire Farm is just one of many Bay State growers growing concerned about preserving farmland. On Tuesday, the governor's office released an initiative to hopefully help that.
We were the first state in the nation to have a state-run agricultural land protection program. Now we're the first state to have an actual state farmland action plan.
Gerard Kennedy from the State Department of Agricultural Resources reacting to the newly released plan. He tells us it's a result of years of work with several collaborators, including the UMass Donahue Institute and the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative. The Massachusetts Farmland Action Plan is a long-range strategic initiative to address the needs of Massachusetts farmland.
Massachusetts is suffering from an alarming loss of active, productive farmland.
The plan is meant to set goals and priorities around the increasing farmland conservation and protection, access to farmland, as well as strengthen their ability to produce food.
I think farmland is one of the renewable resources that we have as a Commonwealth, that if we don't take care of it now, we'll lose it forever if it gets built on.
There are steps proposed to increase land protection programs, enact zoning measures that support farmland and expand and strengthen equity and diversity criteria in all land access programs and investments. Voiland has ideas of what more resilient farming looks like.
Better irrigation systems for the dry years and drainage systems for the wet years, protecting the best prime farmland that we have that does drain well, because New England is likely to become wetter and wetter.
The Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources will coordinate ongoing engagement and outreach with a network of stakeholders who will be involved with the implementation of its goals. For Voiland, it's offering a lot of promise.
I think is going to give us much more guidance on how we can move forward in preserving the farmland and helping the whole agricultural sector succeed in the challenges of climate change and financial viability.
The department is in the process of hiring a farmland action plan coordinator to overlook this process.